Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. In this video, I will be making a VR to the tag Top 10 Guidebooks. This is a tag originally started by Chrissy Bentley and that I first saw in a VR by Katie Flowers. I will link both of their videos below. And I have decided, as I frequently do, to cheat on the rules of this tag where the rules don't suit me. So insofar as, the specification of 10 is a rule, I've decided to get around that rule by making two VRs. So this video will be tarot guidebooks top 10, and in the not so distant future I will be putting up a second VR that will be guidebooks for other systems, mostly Oracle. I think there'll be a Lenormand in there, and so on. So I'm actually going to be doing top 20 guidebooks instead of top 10, but I'll do top 10 today. I have picked 10. They are all tarot. I'm excited to share them with you. I will mention before I get going that these 10 are in no particular order. It's not a countdown or anything like that. It's just 10 guidebooks that I love. And while I talk about them, it will definitely become clear that there are particular characteristics of tarot guidebooks that I like. Like, some of these guidebooks have things in common with each other that are appealing to me. But then there are also quite a lot of diversity and different styles of guidebooks as well in this stack of 10 that I've made. So this isn't, for example, top 10 beginner guidebooks or top 10 guidebooks that are the best kind of standalone tarot learning resources or anything more narrow. This is just the top 10 guidebooks that I love. The only criteria that I've applied to this is that these are all guidebooks, of course. I say of course. To me it isn't of course, it's obviously, that I have read in full cover to cover. I don't read every guidebook that I get cover to cover. I don't necessarily sometimes look at a guidebook at all. And there are some guidebooks in my collection that I am loving right now. For example, like the La Flora Tarot guidebook is fantastic, but I just got that fairly recently and I haven't gotten through the whole book yet. So, shout out, honorable mention to that one, but it's not in this list for that reason. These are the top 10 that I have read in full and would recommend as my top 10 on that basis. Some of these are out of print and quite hard to find, but I'm including my top 10 that I love. Others of these are in print, widely available. There are some mass market decks in here. There are some indie deck guidebooks in here, quite a range. So if any of my top 10 are in your top 10, do let me know. Without further ado, book number 1. I chose the Book of Pandas Official Guide to Walking the Way of the Panda by Kimberly M. Tsan. This is the guidebook for, of course, the Way of the Panda tarot. And this guidebook is one that is sold separately. The deck comes with a smaller guidebook, but this one is really worth getting, in my opinion. If this deck is one that calls to you, this book is fantastic. A couple of reasons that I think that this book is really well done. Kimberly has included a 3-card spread for every major arcana card based on kind of the theme and meanings of that card, and the spreads are really good. That is not something that I've really seen in any other deck that I can think of. And it's a really nice inclusion, I think, in terms of getting to know a particular major arcana archetype or theme. If you're someone who perhaps was working with a card of the year or a card of the month or a birth card or something like that, this would be a great way to do that. There is a "What kind of panda are you?" quiz in here in the front of the book, which is pretty fun to do. I will share with you the type of panda that I got, which says that I have a strong inner panda. So I scored 72 out of a possible 100. You have to score over 75 to get, like, you are actually a panda. I have a strong inner panda. So that was fun. And other things that are great about this guidebook, maybe the most fun thing about this one, in my mind, is that this book tells you the name and details of the personality of every single panda in the deck. So you learn, just to share a few at random, that the Knight of Swords name is Neo, and the Three of Swords panda's name is Clover, and she's a little melodramatic. The Nine of Wands, his name is Striker. The Two of Wands, his name is Samuel. And the book details what exactly each of these pandas are doing, what they're thinking, and what they might have to teach the reader when they appear in a spread. So this is a really fun book. It's a really cheerful book that really, I think, wonderfully suits the spirit of the deck and stands, on its own as something that, as a sold separately guidebook, I would say is really worth every cent to get if you're into the Way of the Panda deck. This is a really, really well done guidebook. The second guidebook that I have on my list here is the Numinous Tarot Guidebook by Cedar McLeod. This is a wonderful guidebook as well. It is like the Numinous Tarot deck, very inclusive. It is the first guidebook that I've ever owned that utilizes gender-neutral language throughout the deck to refer to every figure depicted in the deck on all of the cards. And Cedar has also gender neutralized all of the titles in the deck. So the court cards, for example, are renamed Mystic, Creator, Explorer, and Dreamer. Several of the majors are renamed. This guidebook does a really good job of explaining those choices and making them make sense. A lot of them do to me instinctively, but for example, when you're new to this particular deck, I do think that remembering which court card is the Mystic versus the Creator versus the Explorer versus the Dreamer might be hard to remember, but the guidebook does a really good job of making clear the thought process behind those, and that makes them easier to remember, in my opinion. For each major, you get a description of the actual image, and you get a picture of the card in black and white. You get some upright meanings with keywords and reversed meanings with keywords. And for the minors, you get 1 page. So for the majors, you get 2 pages. For the minors, you get 1. You do still get the image here, and then you get an upright and reverse. And Cedar really thoroughly explains the choices of symbolism in what is clearly a Smith-Waite inspired deck, but also one that deviates quite far from Pamela Coleman Smith's imagery in many, many respects. And so I really like having that explained. The front of the book includes content on each of the 4 suits in a kind of elemental way. It includes on each of the court cards, and it also has some notes on reading. So it talks about, reading reversals and how one might read reversals if one chooses to, using spreads, reading for self versus reading for others. And this one, like the Way of the Panda book, also has some really nice spreads in the front. In particular, it has 1 spread designed around each of the 4 suits in the minor arcana, which I thought was a good idea, as well as a universal messages spread. And this book just feels really relatable for me. It's written relatably. The kind of narrative voice of Cedar is very welcoming and friendly, and accessible, and this guidebook just makes me happy. I love this guidebook, and so I very much recommend the Numinous Tarot guidebook and have it on my top 10 as well. Next up, I have the Landback Tarot and Oracle of Colonization by Kay Demore Flute. And some of these books have a lot of tabs where I've put a note of something that I wanted to go back to. And this deck is a incredible deck, but the guidebook is really, I think, for me, just as important of a part as the deck itself. And it's well kind of put together. You get full color, which is beautiful. And there's a lot in this book that I really appreciate. There's some kind of back story on the creation of the deck, when it was created, inspiration. There are 4 spreads included that range from 3 card to 5 card. And something that I will say, about this book, the Numinous Tarot and the Panda, like that all 3 have in common, is that I feel like they all have these smaller sized, to the point, really good spreads that are unique in that they're not just reproducing, here's a past, present, future spread, for example, that are unique, but they're also not unique in a way that is deck specific, right? So like this book having the daily tarot spread or an in progress spread, step forward tarot spread for making difficult decisions. There's nothing about those spreads in the way that they've been written here that makes them spreads that you would have to use with this deck, right? You certainly obviously can, but I think that they stand on their own. And I feel like spreads often feel a bit thrown into guidebooks to me, particularly when they're spreads that we've all seen a million times. But all 3 of these books that I've shown so far do spreads in a way that I think is really useful and like worth the page space that they take up. So I appreciate that. There's also at the beginning of this book a section that I know I bookmarked, the Major Arcana Spirit section. And so here Auntie Kay explains the journey of the Major Arcana, or the Major Arcana as a journey. And I'm not going to, of course, read all of it, but there's just a little phrase of what one kind of does at each particular Major Arcana. So the idea of Major Arcana 1, the Magician, you learn to use the tool before you. Number 2, the High Priestess, you learn to reach out into the divine. And this is just a little 2-page section, and I've read a lot of tarot books, and this gave me some new ideas to think about that I was appreciative of, very much so. And this deck, specifically the tarot component, the Landback Tarot component, the artwork in the deck includes a mix of folks, some of whom are friends and family members of the creator, some of whom are more kind of like the public figures, political figures, historical figures, and so on. And that's all really well explained in this book. And it's important information for engaging with this deck in a good way. And I wanted to mention before moving on that for folks who don't have this book or this deck, it is out of print. You can go to Auntie Kay's Tarot website, and she has curated a list of reading materials and references based on some of the depictions in this deck. So this deck is depicting, instances and people and issues related to settler colonialism and to resistance against settler colonialism, and related to decolonization. And that material is really important, and you can access those links on her website without having this book. It's very easy to find if you just go to her website. So I would recommend whether you have this book or not, doing that. And I think that was a really effective way, I think, having that extra curated material all linked online was a really effective way to approach doing the guidebook for a deck like this one, right? Because with a limited amount of pages, there's of course only so much that you can fit into a guidebook this length, particularly when you're thinking about things like not making the font inaccessibly small, still wanting photos of the cards and so on. So that was a really good idea, and I'm glad that those links are there, so do check them out. They're one of my top 10 guidebooks, and you can, a lot of tabs is a sign of enthusiasm from me. Definite top 10. The next one I will mention is the guidebook for the Marigold Tarot by Amrit Brar. And it says here, Marigold Tarot, a guide to the symbolism. And this is also a guidebook that is sold separately from the deck. And this is also one, again, that if you are, if you're interested in this deck, if you have this deck, this is, I would say, really important to reading with this deck, at least for me. And I really like this book. And the reason that I like this book is how thoroughly Amrit Brar, the creator, explains her symbolism choices and puts them in the context of both the cultural context, which she explains here is drawn from Sikh Punjabi and Punjabi culture, and also into the tarot. So she explains, for example, the significances of particular plants. For example, in the very front, it's called the Marigold Tarot. Of course, marigold comes very early in the book. That marigolds are commonly seen throughout celebrations and auspicious occasions in an individual's life. They are worn as garlands, scattered freely, grown in abundance, and are featured prominently at festivals and at weddings, and goes on to explain more about the significance of the marigold, specifically in the context of, again, Sikh Punjabi and Punjabi culture, which is the basis for this deck, right? And so, to me, this guidebook is really indispensable to learning about the significance of these different motifs that run throughout the deck. She discusses the Gota embroidery and the significance of the color gold in the deck. It's a black and gold deck. And she really beautifully discusses the choice to depict skeletons and contextualizes that in relationship with Sikh beliefs about life and death, essentially. And for each card, just includes so much. For the majors, for example, including a note of the key symbols included. So, for me, for instance, it wouldn't be apparent to me necessarily that what the world card was depicting was mustard blossoms. I wouldn't necessarily pick that out just from the visual, but it's noted explicitly and explained, right? And so that is really helpful for fully understanding the deck. The minors also include key symbols and why they're there, right? Why they're on the card. So, for example, the Five of Wands, just picking one again at random, the Five of Wands depicts mustard flowers in this deck. And here she notes wild mustard is an incredibly competitive plant when growing alongside wheat or other crops and can greatly reduce their yield. So when you think about a Five of Wands having to do with that kind of clash, right, and often talked about in terms of competition, the book really makes clear the kind of very particular kinds of choices that have gone into this deck to depict those meanings with particular sets of symbols. And so this deck is fantastic. The book does a really amazing job of conveying the artistic intentions and the meanings of the deck. And that, I think, makes this book very, very effective and worth every penny as a book that is sold separately, as far as I know. The next book on my list is the Neo Tarot Guidebook by Jericho Mandibur. This book, I will just get it out of the way and say, this book gets the lowest amount of points for production. For folks who are unaware, this is a mass market deck, and when you buy the deck, the book is glued into the box. I don't know why the publisher did that. I'm not going to carry around a cardboard box stuck to the back of a book when I'm reading it. Like, I just don't know why they would do that. So I pulled mine off and I just glued a piece of black construction paper on it, and it's completely fine. Like, there is a back cover. The back cover is just glued to the box. It does come off okay. So if you like the looks of this deck, don't let that deter you. It's easy enough to separate. Now, what I like about this book, I like a lot of things about this book. And I've done a review. I've done a review of this deck in some detail. And it's a deck that is really focused on the idea of self-care. Okay? And so there's a whole section dedicated to reading the tarot, but it's reading the tarot with a particular kind of self-care lens on it, which I think is interesting and would be appealing to a lot of folks. There is at the beginning a well done section that includes discussion of the significance of each suit, the significance of each number, the significance of each level in the court. So for a beginner book, this would be pretty good. I think if it was the only book that you had, you could start reading tarot with this, I think. For each of the cards, you get quite a bit of information. So for the majors, you get a full page image and then the second page of information. For the minors, the images are smaller, but you do get roughly the same amount of information, which is also nice. You get a few spreads for self-care, and for each of the cards, what you get is a meaning, a reversed meaning, and a self-care activity, a note of the association of the element, some themes, which are like keywords, and an affirmation. And I think that what makes this book one that would be in my top 10 is that I feel like the self-care aspects are done quite well. I think it's really hard, or would be really hard, I've never done it, to make a list of 78 self-care activities and then put that out into the world and have it be relatable to a lot of different readers and also not be alienating or presumptuous about your readers, right? Because of course self-care is really personal in a lot of ways. Something that might feel a lot like self-care to one person could be really not a desirable activity for another person. And I think that overall, that Jericho Mandibur did a really, really good job of picking these self-care activities really mindfully and writing them in ways that feel inclusive, that feel welcoming. They are not activities that require having a lot of resources or spending a lot of money. They're not making presumptions about who the reader is and what they might like to do too much. They're quite approachable, and the affirmations are positive. They're affirmations without feeling fluffy, if that makes sense. I would not say that affirmation deck is a category that I'm necessarily personally drawn to, but I think that this is a self-care oriented tarot, and the book is really central to that. Works well. The deck, I like the deck. It's a very close to Smith-Waite system with a lot of body shape diversity, which I appreciate, but it's really the book where the self-care emphasis comes in, and I do think that part is really well done. So that is why I would put that in my top list. The next book on my list is the Hoodoo Tarot, a 78 card deck and book for root workers by Tiana Lee McQuiller with artwork by Caitlin V. Foisey. I got this deck when Kim at Abundant Life Tarot was doing the deck study group featuring this deck. So she's done deck study groups with a number of different decks. I know the Herb Crafters was one. I'm not sure all of them. But when this one came around, I decided to join in, and I joined in on Instagram. A lot of it's on Facebook. I was not on Facebook at the time. Now I'm not on Instagram either, but I had a good time participating in that tarot study group. And now, I am not a hoodoo practitioner. I would never presume to assess a book in terms of its, its being a good book or not about the practice of hoodoo. That would not, I would not know where to begin. That is not my area, not my lane. But as a tarot guidebook, this is fantastic. And it's not a book about practicing hoodoo. It is a book that celebrates historical and contemporary figures in hoodoo, and that shares information about hoodoo, kind of educational information. And Tiana Lee McQuiller does include her objectives in the guidebook in terms of producing this deck, including things like paying homage to practitioners known and unknown who saw the value in their ancestral practices and had the courage to keep tradition alive despite constant persecution and denigration for doing so, including thinking about the heritages and histories of hoodoo, featuring the flora and fauna and minerals of the southeastern North America, and so on. And there's a little bit about the origins of hoodoo here, and then several of the cards feature historical figures in the development of hoodoo. And as a guidebook, this is so well done in so many respects. The first thing that I want to point to that I love seeing is the bibliography and suggested reading in this guidebook may be the best of such a list in any guidebook that I've ever seen. It is extensive. It is sorted into sections, including American connections, the Black American religious experience, Black secret societies, hoodoo conjuring and folk magic, historical background, indigenous content, and tarot and occult books as well. And there are a lot of excellent sources in this list. Excellent sources. So there's a lot of places to continue to learn. After having engaged with this book, the majors include a image of the card, and the artwork is beautiful in this deck. They include a Bible verse, a plant, a description of the image, and the kind of thought process in choosing the image to go with the particular card, and also a meaning. And then each card also has kind of some prompts that are worded like, if you receive this card in a reading, consider the following. And then there's a bullet pointed list, and some of them are kind of ideas, some of them are just phrases, some of them are questions. They could be journal prompts. They could be kind of a little nudge in terms of a keyword. They could be worked with in lots of different ways. And then for the minors, there's also an image, a description of the image, a meaning, and some keywords for upright and reversed. There are, again, there's something that I like in guidebooks. There are spreads in this book that are very unique to this guidebook, even just in terms of their theme. So, for example, one that stood out to me that I quite liked, where did it go? Called the Right Doc Spread, has to do with doing a reading related to, whether a prospective teacher or mentor is right to work with, right? And what working with that particular teacher or mentor might result in. That's a great idea for a spread, I think. That's excellent. And what this book does, which not a lot of tarot guidebooks do, certainly other books I feel like that you would buy separately do this, but not a lot of deck guidebooks. This one then shows a full sample reading with written up explanations of different cards being drawn for each of the 6 spread positions. I think that is a really good inclusion in this guidebook for sure. And I really, really appreciate this guidebook. It is clear. It is quite comprehensive in terms of the tarot deck. Like, it really explains the thinking behind each of the images. It provides ideas of how in particular to work with this deck, and it has so much extra suggested readings and resources to follow up on to learn more. So this is a really, really great guidebook, and this is a mass market deck as well. And very much, if this deck is of interest to you, don't put the guidebook to one side. This guidebook is really, really good. Definitely one to check out. The next one that I have is The Fifth Spirit Tarot Guide by Charlie Claire Burgess. And this one is, again, a sold separately situation, I think, that, is very much worth getting. And so what I like about this is that this book has a section on tarot beyond the binary and queering your tarot practice that I think is really well done, and that I really appreciate tremendously as a queer reader. It is not a book that you have to be a queer identified reader to learn a lot from, or to get a lot out of, or to, I think, relate to. So I think that whole beginning part is really well done. I really like the amount of information because, I like to read a lot. For each major, you get, 4 pages, I think. 5 pages, almost, in some cases. So it's a lot. And then the minors, you get a full page with a black and white representation of the card. The minors here include some keywords, and then a paragraph or 3 or 4 about each card. The guidebook is written in a gender-neutral fashion. All figures in the deck are referred to with singular they, them pronouns. And the titles in this deck are the traditional Smith-Waite titles. So gendered titles like Queen, like Emperor, for example, are kept in this deck, but people of all different gender expressions are represented throughout the deck. And I think that was a really good choice. This book includes a good spread selection as well. There are quite a few kind of general spreads. There is also a zodiac spread. So there's a spread for each and every zodiac sign that is inspired by and relates to the card that is related to that sign. So for example, there's a Pisces, the moon spread, the wild dance spread for embracing the unknown, which as a Pisces sun, I love that. And this one too has a good selection of references and recommended reading. And this section of references and recommended reading, I really like the diverse nature of it. It includes certainly, of course, tarot books and tarot works. So not just books, but also blogs and websites. And then there's kind of this other works reference that includes everything from Adrienne Marie Brown to Joseph Campbell to Friedrich Nietzsche to Plato to Walt Whitman. Like it's fun. It's a fun list of books that, tells me something about the thought process that goes into this deck. And then there's also a section for all of the different epigraphs that appear within the book itself. That is again a diverse assortment of books. So as a queer tarot resource, I recommend this book even if you don't have the deck, which definitely puts it on my top 10. It absolutely speaks to the specific imagery within this particular deck, but even if this particular deck doesn't feel like your style, the book is still great, and I would still suggest picking up the book. Next book I have to share with you is out of print, and it is the Slow Holler guidebook. This guidebook is a special one to me. Of all the guidebooks that I think I have ever read, this one, and perhaps followed by the Fifth Spirit as well, I can most hear people that I know and love in my personal life speaking when I read this. And that makes it a special kind of experience. For each card, there is a brief kind of, it's not quite keywords because they're kind of like key phrases. And then there's a write-up, and then there's a little key phrases for reversed. So there's just that much for each card. There's no images at all, but it doesn't need it. And the fact that it fits with the deck, that's totally fine. There's a description of the Slow Holler collaborative project. There's a how to read the cards, which is quite brief and is all suggestions because there's no wrong way. There are some suggestions of spreads. There are some suggestions of, if you want to use reversals or not, whatever you want. There's a list of the deck renames of the different kind of major and minor arcana titles. And that's it. It's small and to the point. But these kind of encouraging key phrase parts for each card, I always read them. Like, even if I'm doing a 10 card spread, I read all of them because they just somehow speak to often what I need when I pull particular cards. The Eight of Knives, reclaim agency. Give yourself permission to move, even if you only begin with wiggles. Begin to unravel those harmful thoughts you have about yourself. Don't be afraid of your own power. Eight of Branches, the time to act is now. Don't miss it. Remember that you are capable of maintaining this speed. So many places are calling for your vibrancy and warmth. Map out how you're going to get to them. Sometimes, this is a very personal one. This guidebook just so frequently ends up including exactly a phrase that I didn't know that I needed to hear. And so, that's a hard thing to, pitch as like, this is a top 10 book, and this is, the traits that make it excellent. My relationship with this guidebook is what makes this one of my top 5. I love this guidebook. I have 2 left. The Afro Tarot 2 official guidebook by Jessie Jumanji is also one of my top 10. And this one is available, I believe, on Jessie Jumanji's website as a PDF file as well. So go check that out. This is another one that I think works really well as a guidebook, whether you have this particular deck or not. It is very well, in my opinion, laid out. Each card, major or minor, doesn't matter. They each get the same amount of space. They get 1 page. And you get the image of the card. You get 1 or more proverbs. You get a description of the image in the card, which includes information about where the folks who are being depicted are from and the significance of some of the different, for example, places like architecture or objects that people are holding or clothing that people are wearing. In some cases, there are specific individuals depicted. The cultural context that the people come from is all included in that little description. Then you have keywords upright, keywords reversed, and then you have messages for 4 different areas: spirit and self, home, relationships, and career and finance. And you get upright and reversed keywords for each of those. And you get reflection questions, which could be journal prompts for each and every card. Obviously, the descriptions are very deck specific. They describe the imagery in this deck. But the keywords, the messages, and the reflection questions, I think that you could work with any tarot deck. And I really like how the book is laid out. Like, it feels like, it looks really good on the page, and there's a lot of information, but it also doesn't feel squished. It doesn't feel like everything's, mushed in together and hard to read. Everything's just like the layout is good. And I really like that. There is not too much in the front. It is short and to the point. This is the entire kind of front matter before you get to each card. And it just has an introduction about reading tarot. It has a little section on reversals and what that could mean, and considering positions, in a spread. It describes briefly the major arcana and then the 4 suits and the 4 cards in the court, and that's it. And then it goes straight into card by card content. And so I think that this book, it describes the images in the deck really well, but then also simultaneously is a little book that would be a good one for a tarot beginner, in terms of the keywords and the messages in different areas of life being, I think, a really accessible way to present that information, amenable to a lot of different kinds of readings, whether you're someone who reads in a more predictive fashion or in a more kind of self-exploratory fashion. I think that the keywords work either way. And the reflection questions are great. So a lot to get out of this guidebook, and definitely a top 10. The last one I chose the Gaian Tarot, Heal the Earth and Healing Ourselves by Joanna Powell Colbert. Now this deck, this one I got is the limited edition deck. I ordered this straight from Joanna Powell Colbert. However, as far as I know, the layout has definitely changed, but this guidebook content versus the Llewellyn publication guidebook content are basically the exact same. And I believe the Schiffer one is the same as well. Please tell me if I'm wrong. So like, while this particular version, packaging of the content is, I think, out of print now, this book would be what's in the Schiffer edition to the best of my knowledge, in terms of what's included. So what I like about this is its, earth-basedness, which is what I like about the deck. It has a explanation of, the deck's name, Gaian, and the process of the deck coming about. And then it goes straight pretty much into the cards. And for each major, you get a lot in this deck. So for a major, for example, you get the image, you get a description of the card and what it looks like in this deck. Then there's a section called When You Get This Card in a Reading. And then there's When You Read the Shadow Side of This Card, which could be a reversal, or it could be, a card showing up in a kind of negative or challenging spread position. Then there's a section for each of these majors called Deepening Your Understanding, and it's kind of in this gray box like this. And so this includes themes of that particular card, symbols, and this is symbols in the artwork in this particular deck. So for example, for the High Priestess in this deck, which is the Priestess, symbols include the willow tree, the veil of willow, the pomegranate, which is of course not specific to this deck, but is present here, salmon, owl, the sea, the waning moon, the crescent moon on the headband of the Priestess, the spiral images on the gown, the black and white color of the clothing. So really getting into the significance of each and every symbol that has been incorporated into the artwork. And then you also get journal questions, quite a lot of them, and an affirmation as well, which again, in terms of affirmations, like an affirmation deck is not really my thing, but these are good. These are good. And for the minors, you get, at the beginning of each group of minors, you get a discussion of the themes of that number. So for example, for the 5s, you get this little page that lists the 5s as challenge, change, test, hardship, crisis, conflict, instability, etc. And so a little note on the 5s. And then for each of the cards that are in the minors, you get 1 page. You get the description, you get when you get this card in a reading, when you get the shadow side, and you get the affirmation. So the minors don't have the specific journal prompts, but they do have certainly plenty of content to work from. There are a number of spreads in the back, which are wide-ranging. There's New Year spread, New Moon spread, Full Moon spread, aligning with the Earth spread. They're nice and they suit the deck, but again are not necessarily deck specific at all. And you get a decent bibliography of mostly, but not exclusively, tarot resources. Some of them are spirituality related sources like Women Who Run with the Wolves and Language of the Goddess and books like this. So it's a good book as well. And I think that for a learner of tarot, it's accessible. I think that it does a good job of being kind of on that line between a book that explains meanings in a Smith-Waite tradition and also symbolism and meanings that are very deck specific. And I think that that's a hard balance to get right in a deck like this, but that this book is well done, and that's why it rounds out my top 10. I managed to keep this under an hour. That's so bad. Well, there it is. There's my top 10 tarot guidebooks and why I love them. Some of the many reasons why I love them. I will be back not too long from now with top 10 other guidebooks for other systems. Hopefully I won't take an hour on that one too. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know below what your favorite guidebooks are and why you love them. Have a good one. I'll see you soon. Bye.